is a fun, exciting, and relatively new type of dynasty league out there, and we are here today to tell you what it is all about. How's it going, guys? My name is Andrew. This is the Angle Fantasy Basketball Podcast. So here at Angle, we cover both standard redraft leagues, which is the format most of you play, and we also cover dynasty leagues. And although we cover both, I think we could pretty comfortably say dynasty is our specialty. So to talk about this new type of league, which is known as a Devy Dynasty League, I am joined by two brilliant dynasty minds today. First off, the leader of the dynasty section at Sports Ethos, Mark. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good, Andrew. It actually snowed in Houston earlier this morning, which is crazy, but not letting the cold put a damper on these prospects and what we're going to talk about with this Devy League here.
Absolutely. Some rare weather occurrences going on in both of our home cities. And then, of course, I am joined by one of my partners here at Angle. He partners with me to put together our yearly prospect big boards, and a great dynasty mind. Mitchell, how are you today, dude?
Pretty good, man. I mean, opposite of Mark, it's been very dry here in LA. My hands are so dry, I might be forming some cuts soon. So it's weird. It's like I have eczema. But all things aside, let's look into the positive. And it's, just talking dynasty basketball with y'all.
Absolutely. So before we get further into this, Mitchell, do you want to credit the league organizers and current commissioners of this Devy Dynasty League? Because I know the members of this league are active dynasty analysts who put content out there as well.
Correct. Yeah. So, shout out to Jason DBC for creating this league and inviting both of us to join it. And he's also co-hosting this league with Point Made. And we'll go ahead and include their socials in the link below just to kind of shout them out for a bit.
Very good. All right. So our first question, because one thing about today is both Mitchell and Mark are in this newly formed Devy Dynasty League, and I am not. So I am coming from an outside perspective, just like you listeners. I am not 100% familiar with this league, with this type of league. So I'm going to be asking the most important questions to help us all learn more about what this new type of dynasty league is. We're going to be, curated through that by two guys who are currently in one of these Devy Dynasty leagues. So Mark, as our honored guest for today, here's our first question for you, or my first question for you. What is a Devy Dynasty League?
So the Devy stands for development, and essentially you take your standard dynasty league. In this case, it's a 14 team. You start 20 roster, 20 players overall. But in addition to that, you tack on 5 minor league spots. And these minor league spots, or these minor spots on Fantrax is what they're called, they are solely meant for prospects that are entering the upcoming draft. We draft those prospects in January. That's going to be ahead of the upcoming NBA draft class. So, for instance, we just did our prospect draft in January over the past couple of weeks. These are drafting prospects expected to enter in the 2025 NBA draft. Then you have until the following prospect draft next January to either add those 5 drafted prospects to your main roster, or you dump them in favor of new incoming prospects.
All right. So in this type of concept, what you're saying is on your roster, which is, I'm pretty sure this type of league can only be played on Fantrax. So far, they offer that type of customization, but that means your roster can contain both Kevin Durant, a player currently in the NBA, and Cooper Flagg, a player currently in the NCAA playing for Duke, correct?
Yep, you got it right.
Excellent. All right. So another basic question I have for you is for the stats, because obviously there's, stat accumulation, playoffs, and then an eventual winner of this league. Do the stats accumulate for both NCAA and NBA players? Like they're both contributing to you winning, or is it only NBA players and the upcoming NCAA and international prospects don't accumulate stats until you're in the NBA?
Definitely a good clarification. It's only the NBA stats. So even though Cooper Flagg is doing awesome right now at Duke, it's zeros across the board. And in fact, he would have to stay in your minors. If you were to draft him in January, you can't use him for these next upcoming months because he's not in the NBA yet.
All right. So the attractive concept about, of course, is that you get to jump out and secure your guy early. You don't have to wait to see how, lottery odds play out for you at the end of your dynasty season to see where you'll end up drafting them after the NBA draft in June. You get to hop out on them early, like you said, in January, and also taking some gambles to ensure that these guys remain within, let's say a lottery pick, or even decide to declare for the NBA draft. I assume that's a natural risk as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's somewhat factored into some of the players I drafted even or considered drafting, where I thought some of them might have been fringe, maybe freshmen who I thought maybe could use another year in college hoops and maybe wouldn't declare. And that actually strayed me away from drafting him a little bit, because then I would just probably drop that draft pick in favor of a different one later on. So yeah, that definitely swayed my opinion.
Okay, very good, very good. So that's definitely a delicate dance to play, or delicate game to play, I should say, which is also correctly guessing on which prospects are going to actually declare for this upcoming 2025 NBA draft. But I assume if they don't declare, you get to just continue to stash them if you want to, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
So, yep, you got it.
All right, perfect. So now let's talk about how the initial startup draft process works. So I am told by you guys that you guys had two separate drafts. One took place through the traditional Fantrax format, and the other one took place offline. So Mitchell, kind of break that down for us, how the startup draft works, how this league was kind of put together in that way.
So the beginning of the league was kind of constructed a little bit last minute when you would typically draft a startup. Our startup began 2 weeks into the NBA season. So how it was set up, you have a whole pool of, let's say, of players you can select. You can select NBA players, or you can select placeholder players for the Devy draft 2 or 3 months later into the season. In this case, for us, we started a little bit early than scheduled in December 30th, but typically the draft would be hosted in January. So it was a very interesting thing to really see how everything played out, where the number one overall pick in the upcoming draft would be valued at, where we will be going a little bit more into detail, along with some of those other picks in like the mid to late lottery. So it was a very interesting process. I've never been in a Devy League myself, so this is a first time experience on my behalf. Devy leagues are more so, if you aren't familiar, for the audience who don't know, are popular in a football setting. So this is a pretty new concept being introduced into fantasy basketball. And it's pretty exciting, especially because we get to say that we identified talent early on before the consensus. And, let's say 2 or 3 years ago, you were very high on Jalen Williams. Jalen Williams really rose in the in the draft combine post March Madness. So if you're able to identify Jalen Williams, let's say in the traditional 30s to 40s range, where he was initially slated in, before the combine, that's a home run swing right there. Who is now a top, arguably a top 10 dynasty asset. So you have the potential to make these home run swings and capitalize it. And I think that's a big intriguing factor of why I am, and Mark, of course, are interested in a Devy league.
That's a great point that you bring up, is that like I mentioned earlier, you are taking a gamble on drafting guys right now because things could shift in the closer to the pre-draft process. And like you mentioned with the NBA combine too, there's guys who come from relatively out of nowhere to leapfrog up a few spots and get drafted a lot higher than a lot of us anticipated. So the combine's a great like growing platform for some of these players who maybe played at a smaller school, such as Jalen Williams at Santa Clara, but were then able to show that they can hang with upper level NBA talent. That could be similar to a few guys who were taken from the last few draft classes. There's always some guys that come from really small schools that no one heard about, but talent comes from all places, and being able to identify it this early on, I would probably think, at least as of right now, Devy Dynasty leagues are probably most popular amongst really hardcore dynasty players, people who play multiple dynasty leagues. Maybe you're in deeper dynasty leagues, like a 30-team league, which also involves stashing guys that maybe are in the G League or on two-way contracts. Like, for example, a great success story from that is like a Keon Ellis, taken as a two-way player and is now fully rosterable for somebody who, gambled on him really early on. But you get to gamble even earlier than that. And in addition to that, it involves keeping track and tabs of a whole new set of players, not just the current NBA players, but also, those out there in the amateur ranks, as well as, overseas professional ranks. And at least I think there's still one team that's able to produce G League prospects, straight from the G League and into the NBA draft as of right now, too, in Mexico City. So let's, as you talked about the initial startup draft, let's go ahead and take a look at how both of your teams look at the moment and what, decisions you made in the initial startup draft. And then we will dive in more to the prospects that you guys are stashing as well.
So now we're going to look into the initial startup draft that started in October. And I had the blessing to have the first overall pick. And you know who is the first overall consensus right now? It's Victor Wembanyama, the unicorn himself. Someone who has been touted as the potential number one draft pick since he was 15 years old when he played one-on-one against Rudy Gobert overseas in France that one year. So there has been, a lot of hype around him. And, thankfully, I was able to select him first overall. Now, my friend Mark here had the seventh or the eighth overall pick. Could you talk me through this selection since it wasn't a no-brainer like the Wemby selection at number one?
It actually kind of was a bit of a no-brainer for me. I knew Flag is going probably most likely is going to be really good. I just felt that's a little too early for him still. And then Tatum was still there at 8, and that just kind of felt like the pretty clear, obvious selection. You can go in any direction with Tatum. No build at that point. You can go wherever you want. Very reliable player, very steady. Pretty much locked in that 5-7 dynasty range, I'd say, for most people. So him dropping to 8 was a bit of a surprise, and I was just like, all right, cool, Tatum, done.
Right. And I remember, discussing with you on who are you going to select? There's always that type of anticipation knowing, where your opposition is swaying one way or the other. Was there any, I know you mentioned it was a no-brainer for you, but were you considering Cooper Flag that early at 8? Because we see him here going at 10 shortly after.
No, I really didn't. And I mean, I've scouted Cooper Flag more heavily since then, and I mean, he does look awesome. It's just even then, it's just I think really hard for any rookie to come in and be like top 10 when there are such established players, and when Tatum is so established himself. I mean, I'm going to take the former Duke players actually in the NBA now and producing over the Duke prospect who we can feel sure about, but maybe not 100% sure about.
100%. Andrew, any surprises here with Cooper Flag taken at number 10? I know there were concerns about his ability to create on offense, but now those doubts have been silenced in recent years, in recent months, where he was able to drop 42 points, the most of any Duke prospect in history against Notre Dame.
Well, I mean, of course, I agree. Cooper Flag's very good, but I think if I was in a situation like drafting around that range, 7 through 10, I would have done exactly what Mark did and taken, a more safer proven product, especially for the initial startup draft. And especially in a draft that's among other, good dynasty minds out there too. So keeping in mind how competitive a league like that's going to be, you don't want to swing and miss early, that early on in a startup for dynasty. This is a non-salary league, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And just one thing to note too is that this isn't necessarily Cooper Flag. This would have been pick 1 in that Devy rookie draft later. But
okay.
But we ended up being Cooper Flag, but
right. Okay, so if he ended, it could have, someone could have potentially preferred Dylan Harper or something like that. But the reason why I asked if it was salary or non-salary, which is shout out to Rhett Bauer getting a great deal on Giannis at 14, that you don't have to worry about his salary. So solid selection there. He slid a little bit, and then I see J-Dub and Şengün. Well, Şengün's range is fairly normal, but J-Dub slid down a little bit compared to where we currently have him at. So that's probably my biggest surprise of the first round is someone got a great deal on Giannis.
Yep, 100%. And when you look at the second round, I believe Mark took another mid 20-year-old. And at that point, you kind of had that direction of competing this year, correct?
Yep. I that tends to be where I go in startup drafts. I think people, especially in this Devy league, people are going to get hyped up for the younger players and the rookies and prospects, which isn't. I'm not even saying that's the wrong approach or a different approach. It's just not necessarily my philosophy. So if I have someone like Donovan Mitchell fall into 21, and I already have Tatum, all right, I'm pushing to win then this year.
And what people sometimes undervalue is when you turn 25 years old, your dynasty value tends to depreciate pretty rapidly is when you tend or where they tend to get that label of being old. Not necessarily, primes are being pushed out to the mid 30s now. We're seeing Steph Curry, James Harden, you know, players that are on their mid 30s right now and having playoff teams. Warriors arguably, but Clippers looking like they're firmly outside of the play-in, and with Kawhi Leonard back in form, healthy, kinda, they're looking like a playoff lock this year. So with my second pick, I went ahead and went young to pair with Victor Wembanyama with Amen Thompson at 28th overall. And I just thought of the stock potential that the two provide, and also how, Amen Thompson is emerging into his own. This is someone who I've always been high on. I believe I have three stocks. Someone I also took in the first round in our Angle Dynasty League. Completely justified. I know it was a little early at the time, but now, now that we see all the hard work that Emin has put into merging into the starting lineup. Or by the way, it's going to be hard for Jabari Smith to get his starting role back. I don't think they're going to bench Dylan Brooks moving forward. They need his spacing. Amen Thompson is clearly the better player right now and just as young. So I know, Mark, you're a Rockets fan. I hope you agree with, my assessment here, but Amen Thompson is a very special player and has that top 20 nine cat potential. Any words on Amen Thompson for you, Mark, as a Rockets fan?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up. He's been amazing in this stretch. I mean, really, the whole season been out being thrust into the starting lineup, and he's even upping his scoring a little bit, being even more aggressive, driving and calling his own number there. And well, while he's kind of maybe barging in the crowds a little bit, and he's athletic enough to do that and pull it off. So yeah, I mean, I when you made this pick, I was like, okay, maybe a little early, but I get it. But it's definitely paying dividends for you.
Thank you, man. Then I went ahead and drafted another player from the 2023 class, Scoot Henderson. And this pick, didn't look so hot in the first quarter and a half of the season, but lately Scoot has been averaging 25 points per game over the last couple weeks or so. Had 8 assists the other night, and he's looking like a great two-way prospect. He's playing defense, he's improving, he's playing smarter. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about the Scoot Henderson pick there. And then I see you took Domantas Sabonis, but before we go into that, we have our second pick for the Devy Startup League at 35 overall, where NBA prospecting took Supreme Cook. I think it was at this point, some people were just playing, taking names with funny placeholders, Supreme Cook being one of them at Oregon. And we'll go into this later, but he ended up taking Supreme Cook there. Andrew, I know this is kind of like where the draft gets interesting in terms of, two to the rest of the lottery. Would you say this is a bit early, or is this something that you expected?
So Supreme Cook really represents like either Dylan Harper or whoever it is you want to select that too.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I'm trying to think of where I think Dylan Harper is going to end up, and I might be around there. It might be more like early 40s, but uh, I don't know. It gets really interesting here because like round 2 and 3 has some good steals. Like shout out to Zach at Dizzle Dynasty. Devin Booker at 23 is solid. Mark, my God, Sabonis at 36 is wild. That is wild. Shame on the rest of you in round 3 for letting that happen. So that's an awesome one. But I mean, there is some clear guys, like for example Sabonis, that I would rather have than Dylan Harper at this point. But if you ask me if I'd rather have Dylan Harper or Joel Embiid, I'd probably lean towards Harper on that one, just re-rolling the dice with a fresh new body who has functional knees. But some of the other names, once you get more towards the bottom, like Franz Wagner, that's debatable on if I'd rather have him or Harper. Um, let's see here. I'd rather have Harper than Bam for sure, than Bane, Reed Shepard as well. Brunson, I'm not sure. That's maybe 50-50 for me on that one. So, yeah, this seems like an okay range for Harper to pop up because there is definitely some guys in this round like Zion, Embiid, Shepard, Bane, Bam, who I would for sure rather have Harper than,
Well,
definitely.
Andrew, this is what makes it interesting. In the initial startup, Harper wasn't the consensus number two overall prospect at the time.
Okay. Okay.
There was a mix of players. I believe it was like Nolan Traore, whose stock has plummeted. He's
Yeah.
been playing better as of recently. Ace Bailey,
Okay.
BJ Edgecombe, and Dylan Harper. So those were all in the mix for that number two spot. And it was basically selecting the number two overall pick to get your pick of the crop of those four guys. But now playing it all out, getting that number two pick in this startup has played dividends for NBA prospecting because there has been kind of where Dylan Harper has been its own tier.
Mm.
Maybe Kasparis has joined that tier, but
Yeah, it's
after
close.
pick four, I'd say there's a pretty deep decline on kind of those established prospects at the top of the draft.
Yeah. I would, yeah. The first like 2 to 3, I'm very, very comfortable with this draft, which in my opinion should be Flag, Harper, and Jacushonis. I'm very, very comfortable with that. And then, questions start popping up for me once we get to 4 and onwards. So yeah, like looking at because obviously this happened, a few weeks ago. So in retrospect, getting to right around that range to secure your pick of Harper or Kasparis is solid. And now that it's probably going to end up being Harper, I haven't seen the Devy draft yet, so we'll take a look to see what it ends up being. But if it does end up being Harper, then I do like that, as I said about compared to some of the other guys in that round.
Right. So, what I thought was a steal, I'm just gonna go a little bit forward so we can move on to the Devy draft itself. But the next pick at 57 was the fourth overall pick, which I thought was a steal, not knowing in hindsight that the top three kind of established its own tier in its own. So I thought I
Okay.
was getting, the leftovers of those type of players that were kind of all in a similar tier. But with how it played out, I'm not feeling, the most giddy per se on when I was drafting on my turn. So, um, fourth pick went there. The next pick at six was by Point Made Liam at
So
87.
I'll
So,
actually interject
I
here.
think I think Mark has one.
oh,
Yeah,
sorry about that.
Yeah, look
no,
at
no
that
worries.
Arthur Kaluma. Yeah.
Yeah, hook 'em,
Oh,
go horns. Um, no, yeah. So at this point, I mean, I drafted Sabonis, as you said, which I thought was great, just win now value. Drafted Durant in round 4. So at this point, I could have just kept drafting some more veterans and starters, but I felt like I had enough excess value where I could go for that fifth pick and kind of get the last of that group of 2 to 5 that Mitchell was talking about. It turns out that that was not as secure as I thought, but that was my thinking there. I'm going to draft pick 5, inject a little bit more youth into the squad while still having a pretty good win now team and being able to kind of, two timelines it a little bit.
yeah. And, when you look at this draft board, Mark, I know we talked about that 2 to 5 range, kind of established its own tier in itself early in the pre-draft process. And we can see this evidently in this startup draft, where since your pick, there hasn't been a pick for that Devy draft in, I believe, 23 turns and 23 selections. So that tier is definitely evident in that pre-draft process from our startup draft. Uh, then we get to that sixth pick where it is really ambiguous waters, right? No one really knows how the draft is going to play out, how the process is, what those big boards are going to look like 2 to 3 months later, where we start taking these Devy picks and selecting our prospects. So that is that one last point that I want to kind of reinstate. Then the seventh pick, I believe, is at 105. So, at that point, people are kind of just selecting the rookies from the 2024 class. As you can see, like Ron Holland here, Zachary Risache, Stephon Castle, just because after that top five, it's open waters. With that being said, we kind of get an idea of how these picks are being valued, especially in the mid and early lottery. Let's go ahead and look at the actual Devy draft that we've held. Some notable names here, like two people, two analysts from Point Made Josh, Point Made Liam. We have NBA prospecting, Mark here, of course, Jason, the owner and creator of this league, Dynasty Dizzle here. So a lot of big names here, and a lot of big Dynasty draft junkies as well. Andrew, did you want to lead us from the picks one to, let's say pretty much the first round, 1 to 30 in a standard 30 team league.
Okay.
And
Do you
let me
want
know
to?
if you have any surprises and, we can help
Yeah, if I
clarify
want to talk
anything.
about someone specifically, let's do it. All
Correct.
right.
Yep.
So our boy Josh at Point Made at 1.01, he took Cooper Flag. So he stuck with who still remains as consensus one overall for this 2025 class. NBA prospecting made the right choice that I was kind of foreshadowing to earlier at pick two. He took Dylan Harper. And then Point Made Josh coming in for the second time in the top three. He took Kasparis Giacosionis. So top three played out exactly like I expect it to for the real NBA draft, maybe, but mostly for dynasty rookie drafts that are going to take place over the summer. That's more than likely going to be the first three. But that brings us into number four, which is your pick, Mitchell. This is someone who started off the season with a lot more steam than he currently has right now, which is Jaeger Deming. So Jaeger was a very highly touted prospect coming into BYU. He's would be the first professional Russian player since Timothy Mozgov. So not necessarily a deep a deep like treasure trove of Russian prospects that often make it to the NBA. So this is kind of a rarity, but he is one of these standard European pass, dribble, shoot, wing-sized players, which is very interesting, especially from a dynasty perspective, and then from a real life NBA perspective. The NBA is really gravitating towards players like that nowadays. For example, Tristan da Silva in the most recent draft is somebody that Orlando decided to use a pick on in the late teens for another one of those options that's kind of just a miniature version of what Paolo and Franz do, is just a jumbo pass, dribble, shoot type of player. So give me your thoughts on Jaeger Deming, how his season's going at BYU, and if you're maybe worried a little bit about this selection now looking back on it. I mean, I don't. First off, I must say I don't blame you for kind of just taking this pick here, because the first three, the most wantable three, were gone.
Yeah, yeah. I was really hoping for whatever reason, fell on my lap. Unfortunately, I was tasked with a very tough decision. And just to walk you down through my thought process here on, the fourth overall selection, I was thinking of three different players. I discussed this with Mark over DMs. I was thinking of Derek Queen, who Mark selected right after me, Igor Demin, and VJ Edgecombe. I do have some regrets with Igor Demin. I made this selection before his return from that knee contusion, where, he was playing pretty spectacular, playing against UCR, almost, nabbing triple doubles, having active hands, those steal numbers popped. I was genuinely excited, especially with the three-point shooting that was a concern before he entered, the collegiate season. And we thought this was all fixed. But it turns out he did have a lack of competition in those early games. A team in our conference, Andrew, in the Big West, UCR, is not a notable team by any means. And then he went ahead and played against Providence, where, he shot like 20%. He had a couple turnovers, nothing necessarily popped per se. So I thought, okay, it could just be one bad game. Everyone is young, everyone could have a bad game now and then. Then he gets injured, right? So there was that period where we didn't see any live game action from Igor Demin for about a month. And I like the fantasy translation when it turn in terms of a nine category game. He was pretty solid in points. He doesn't have that necessarily juice against, higher competition. He doesn't create space very well. But what really excited me in Igor Dimin was his passing. He's someone who I believe is the best passer in the draft. He makes very high level reads for someone who is 6'9". It's just that I don't see that handle necessarily developing to be a scorer, which would enhance his playmaking opportunities. So someone like a Franz Wagner who has a really tight handle, Igor Demin kind of plays like a 6'9" guy, but with, incredible passing instincts. Um, so right now that kind of comparison from a Franz Wagner kind of turns into more of a Josh Giddey who doesn't necessarily have that three-point shooting prowess you would want. Josh Giddey is a pretty controversial player, not only off the court, but in terms of, a category game because of those efficiency percentages. Igor Demin may be similar, but I still think he's young enough to figure it out. Igor Demin is only, I believe, 18 or 19 years old. So, someone who I still believe in, but my panic meter has risen since this draft selection.
Yeah, with Jaeger, I mean, I could see some of the Giddy comparisons, but one thing he doesn't have that Giddy has is that those playmaking chops. Giddy is like a substantially better passer, so it's like if his passing is limited to like four-ish assists per game, a floor could be like maybe a not as good of scoring Denny Avdia, but it still could easily translate to being a very high ceiling player because he does have a lot of the physical tools that you want, and he is on the younger side as well too. He's not like who I mentioned earlier, De Silva, who came in his early 20s. So there's definitely still some hope for Jaeger. But one key point you brought up in your spiel about Jaeger is fantasy translation, and that's what heavily applies to who was selected at number 5 by Mark, which is Derek Queen. So he's in this funny middle ground that some of these European big men is in. I very much remember this being the case for Alperen Şengün when he was drafted. So in the real life NBA draft, it's probably going to be late lottery or somewhere outside of the lottery. But in dynasty leagues, because the skill set translates so well to 9 category, he could easily go, top 7, top 5 in a dynasty rookie draft due to that. So that's exactly what happened to Şengün when he was drafted in 2021. He was drafted 16th in real life, and in most dynasty startups, he was drafted like 5 to 7 range. And although the 9-cat translation is there, the concern is for real life basketball, mainly on the defensive end. If there's some specific question marks that will decrease his floor time and not get him to play out the potential that we can all see as the case for a 9-cat player. So Mark, talk to us about how you feel about your selection of Derek Queen.
You summarized him pretty nicely there. When I did a lot of my scouting heavily over the holiday breaks in anticipation of the draft that happened December 30th. I loved how Quinn could put the ball on the floor, had pretty good quick area burst for his size, could get to the rim, good finishing touch, good strong 2-point percentage. But you mentioned a lot of those question marks with his defense. Is he going to be big enough for the center? He's not playing center at Maryland. He's playing next to big at other times. So it's unclear whether he could play the big defensively or if that's just not in his tool chest. The shooting has been pretty suspect. So there's a lot of question marks, but there's still a lot to like about his game. I feel like I fell into not the same trap that Mitchell fell in, but maybe the same area of concern where conference play hadn't yet started yet when we did this Devy draft. It was in the middle of starting, but not many games. And now as Queen is playing tougher competition, we're seeing him struggle a little bit more. And I now have some concerns that maybe Queen wasn't the right selection here at 5, but we'll see. I still have hope. I think we're seeing that also with Jeremiah Fears. Not sure if we're going to talk about him, but playing now against SEC competition, he's struggling a bit more. And he went 7th here in this draft. I don't know if he would go there 7th if we did a redraft or not. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But more on Queen. I mean, I love big man who can have those ball skills, and so I'm hoping that ends up translating, and then he can go maybe like late lottery in a team just fall in love with him as I kind of fell in love with him during the scouting process here.
Yeah, I could definitely see, what there is to like about Queen. And, it could absolutely be a gamble that ends up paying off. But, Mitchell, let's talk about who is taken at number 6. So this is someone that opinions have gone back and forth on. Mitch, where do you currently stand on Ace Bailey?
You know, I would probably take Ace Bailey fourth now. He's one of the youngest players in the draft. There were concerns about his efficiency, his shot selection, shot diet, however you want to call it. But, during the Big Ten play, Ace Bailey has really turned it up. And, a lot of it has benefited with Dylan Harper's absence when he had the flu. Dylan Harper lost like 12 pounds. He's still recovering. He's had some, games where he struggled. But in that absence, Ace Bailey has really stepped up. He's had really great showcases of his efficiency. His rebounding numbers are up. His active hands have popped in terms of translations for stocks. And he's looking like an overall pretty great prospect, despite, that handle that, is a concern in terms of creating his own shot at the NBA level. Ace Bailey probably goes arguably third or, you know, maybe someone falls in love with the athleticism and superstar potential over a Casparis. But if I had to do it again, I'd probably take him fourth. Would you agree, Mark? If Ace was still available at 5, would you take him there?
I'd probably look to trade down or trade out if I could. Honestly, I don't know if I want to draft at 4 or 5 or 6, and I think someone would probably fall in love with one of the players available. I'd honestly probably try to trade out and just get that pick value back. I don't feel. I mean, we mentioned it a couple of times. After pick 3 in this draft, as of today, I don't really feel great from like 4 to like 7 or 8.
That's kind of a
Agreed.
plan I'm thinking about. Is I have one dynasty league that I'm taking in, and I right now I'm in the bottom 3, so I have odds for number 1. But if the lottery gods punish me and push me outside of the top 3, I'm probably trading out of that. Because I mean, especially on draft day, you could always get really good value for that. So yes, you could have one of you could have taken Ace Bailey there, but there is the ability to trade here too. And we'll talk about some trades that have happened. We'll go through. Let's round out the top 9 here because the top nine's got some good names. So after Ace Bailey, Mark, I think you wanted to talk about Jeremiah Fears a little bit. Are you following him at all in his SEC play?
Yeah, I mean, he really shot up with his performance in November and December. The smaller shooting guard wasn't really on anyone's radars. I mean, you look at early like preseason mock draft boards or big boards, he's not in the top 60 at all. I think he would be not, I think he'd still be 18 when he ended the draft. Is a really young player. Pro, he's listed at 6'4", probably more like 6'2", honestly. He does not look big out there, but he can really get to the rim, score well, and really stack on a lot of free throw attempts and shoot well. So there's a lot of indicators that look positively. The problem with him is that, as I mentioned, he is small. He is sometimes struggling on defense. His passing and turnovers are definitely suspect. He has a huge amount of turnovers. Maybe that's due to his role in usage. Maybe that's due to him not finding the right passes and a slightly looser handle than what you would like. But there is a lot to love about him. When you factor in that age, you factor in that ability to get to the rim. There's a lot of intriguing indicators with Jeremiah Fears for sure.
Very good. Very good. So the next 2 selections at 8 and 9 were both made by Josh at Point Made. Josh, if I was in your situation, these are the exact 2 picks that I would have made, especially at this range where some of the more like highly skilled guys are gone. And really where you're selecting from is maybe some lesser skilled guys, but also the cream of the crop in the draft class in regards to athletic prowess. So at 8, he took VJ Edgecombe. I know, Mitch, that you were looking into VJ a little bit in your pre-draft process. How do you feel things are going for him so far in conference play with Baylor?
VJ Edgecombe has stepped up his efficiency as of late. He started the year pretty terribly. I believe overall field goal percentage was around like 36%. He's bumped up his numbers to around the low 40s, which is a good indicator that he's improving throughout the season. What really interested me in a VJ Edgecombe, especially with my building around stocks and defensive stats with Amen Thompson, Victor Wembanyama, of course, Scoot Henderson, and those athletic freaks, he really fits that mold. And what's interesting about him is that he's one of the best shot blocking guards right now in collegiate play. I believe he's averaging almost 1.5 blocks per game, and I think 2.4 something steals. I haven't checked his stats recently, but that's what he was holding in that draft process during the Devy draft. And it was very intriguing. However, I kind of wanted just to blend it out with the Igor Demin who contributes more across different categories. But looking back, VJ Edgecombe looks like a top five guy for me moving forward.
All right. And then at number 9, also made by Josh at Point Made, Kaman Malawak. So I know things weren't like expectations weren't super high on him to start the season. Everybody was kind of coming in with the assumption that he was very raw. And at least in the beginning of this season, he was proven correct. But from what I've been both seeing and hearing, it seems like he's really turning things around and is looking more and more like an NBA player in general. Yes, that might not completely translate onto the stat sheet, but I'm hearing good things about his defensive prowess. He's able to move his feet really well. The speed isn't really a concern. That's part of why I also referred to him as an athletic freak. At least for a guy his size, he moves really well. So Malawak is definitely a very interesting one to me personally in this upper echelon of the lottery here. This is somebody who I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on, especially because centers, when you get into deeper dynasty leagues, like a 30-team league, viable centers are pretty hard to come by. You don't want to be stuck with like Mason Plumlee and Marvin Bagley or something like that, which is totally possible if you don't get centers early on. So being able to grab a homegrown one from the draft in somebody like Malawak is a great move for a team that needs a center. Even if you need to reach over, a player or two who might have gone above Malawak in consensus, if you need that center position, it's one of the harder ones to get in these deeper leagues. So I like him a lot moving forward.
I mean, sometimes your center rotation is Mason Plumlee and Yusuf Nurkic, and you have to trade for Nick Richards.
Right? Absolutely. That is absolutely true. So before we move on, just to talk a little, or just to kind of close things out and talk a little bit more about how to study some of these prospects, is there any favorite stashes you guys wanted to give a shout out to, like maybe from round 2 or 3 that you guys picked up?
I'll go ahead and go first and I'll turn it over to Mark. This is someone that Mark actually wanted, and I selected Rocco Sarkowski at pick 34 overall. So he's someone who had a lot of hype coming into the pre-draft process. I believe Ben Pfeiffer, one of the other draft analysts, real draft analysts, not someone who does dynasty or fantasy basketball leagues, had him with a top 5 grade. So someone who had some insane hype, his block percentage was, I believe, over like 10%, which is pretty rare. Think Derek Lively, that type of block percentage, Walker Kessler. So something that's very translatable if given the minutes. And a big reason why he fell this far is because he's playing for the Brisbane Bullets, who are looking to win. They're trying to make the playoffs in the NBL. So as a result, someone who is very green and raw, he gets some coach DNPs. He may not be ready for those competitive minutes. We know it's very hard for these type of players that are young to get minutes in the NBL. Just look at Alex Sarr from last draft. He only averaged, I believe, 18 minutes per game for an NBL team for the Perth Wildcats. So that's a huge reason why the fall in stock. But if he ever gets an opportunity, you know, in the NBA, those numbers could pop, and this could be a great home run swing for me moving forward. So there is still that potential where he is getting taken in the first round of the NBA draft, where his stock will surely skyrocket. He's only 18 years old. He is 7'3", and he is mobile and athletic for a big man. So something that I'm very excited for. And for my team, especially, I'm building a team around 7'3" international players. So Rocco Zerkowski really fits that build.
Anyone you want to talk about, Mark?
I'll kind of pair Noah Penda at 2.11, which would be the Now I'm trying to do math live on recording. Someone in the
25.
20s, 25. Yes, thank you. And Adothiero at this would be mid 30s. Kind of similar-ish players, good size wings forwards who both will have a Penda is going to have a draft age of about 20 and a half, so he's a little older, but really good steal abilities, can really knows how to get his hand in there both in isolation and then also just as an event creator helping off the nail. And I think he has enough offensive skills to survive there. The shooting percentages aren't great. They're either high 20s or low 30s on low volume. So that's not encouraging, but I think he makes quick, snappy passes, can at least play enough of a role in the offense where he'll see minutes because of his defense. And then I'm willing to bet on that steals and defensive upside paying dividends. And that's kind of the Arrows game as well, a little bit, where he played his first 2 seasons at Kentucky before transferring to Arkansas. And he's going to come into the draft 21. He's going to be an older player, but 6'8", about 225 pounds, pretty good NBA size, pretty good attacker at the rim. Again, picks up those steals really nicely, a good defensive player. Shot form, kind of similar to Penda. I kind of think picked similar themed players here. Not sure about his other aspects of his game, if he can pass well enough, if he can dribble or shoot well enough, but I'm willing to bet again on that steals upside and kind of hoping that the offense works out well enough. And I'm hoping between one of these two players, I kind of get a defensive specialist out of one of the two.
Now, I understand, Mark, that you made a fairly good sized trade to get this league started. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Yes, yep. In this, so in the Devy draft, or not the Devy draft, rather the startup draft, one of my draft selections I selected was 1.07. And then when it got the draft time, and I talked to DBC Jason, and I ended up trading away the 7th pick and Isaiah Collier for the 9th pick and Cam Johnson, trying to go into a bit more win now. And I was actually hoping that VJ Edgecombe or Jeremiah Fears would still be there at pick 9, because that was kind of the two I was targeting there, but I felt that the value of moving down from 9 was still worth it. Of course, Edgecombe goes at 8, Fears goes at 7. So then I was left kind of, well, I don't want pick 9. I kind of want to trade out of this tier in my eyes. So then I talked to Point Made Josh, and I traded that 9th overall pick with a future 1st and 2nd and 3rd, and then received back the 25 pick in this draft, and then some future late round picks like 4th and 5th rounders to receive Tyler Harrow. When I was very happy to do that, I basically, in my mind, traded a player who, I mean, probably is going to be in the early hundreds in startup drafts, probably, if you look at that, whoever the 9th rookie is, let's just say roughly, and then a future first, which I'm going to be a strong team, I would think, in this league. My team still has plenty of good players where I should be able to compete next year. It's going to be, again, probably a rookie in the 15 or the 150 range probably next season to get a player like Tyler Harrow, who is top 50, top 60 dynasty value. Yeah, I'm going to do that deal and get that guaranteed value now. And he's still young. He's only 25, 26. So he still have plenty of prime fantasy years ahead of him.
So that's going into how the startup draft and initial amateur prospect draft went down. Mitchell, as you can see from the draft list that you were showing us for your guys' offline draft, it extends in pretty deep. So you need to be knowledgeable of more than just, who the projected lottery talent is for the 2025 class in order to, participate in a league like this one where you're stashing up to 4 amateur players. So what are just some basic free to use resources you would recommend for somebody trying to learn more about the upcoming draft class, especially if it's in the middle of the year?
Yeah, some good ones. Preliminary are NBA Draft Net, a very popular one, which provides various scores on different attributes. It also provides different draft boards, whether it's a big board or a mock draft that's paired with different teams. Some podcasts that I really love listening to in terms of draft evaluations. I'm going to go ahead and search it really quick so I don't get the name wrong. I love No Ceilings. No Ceilings does an amazing job going in depth on different players in particular. And they also do film studies, which is very helpful in the evaluation process. But however, there is a new podcast that I believe just started sometime this year called the Draft Council with Ricky Sanchez. Another great resource to go that really goes into deep dives on mock boards. And what's interesting about them, they even go further down the line in future NBA drafts. So they go the extra mile to help you stay ahead of your competition. So they keep up with high school recruiting and international prospects. So big shout out to the Draft Council, and a huge resource for me when I was evaluating talent for my Devy draft. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, you mentioned no ceilings. Definitely a fan of theirs, and they have a lot of people that write up. So when they have those consensus big boards come out, I think it's a good, at least consensus, a good a heuristic or to judge against and see if I'm crazy or not. I also like Sam Vecini and his work at The Athletic. He also has the game theory pod, really goes in depth, and you can tell he just loves scouting and watching the game. Also love Hoops Intellect over on YouTube. I don't think he has any podcast or anything. He sometimes will make podcast appearances, but I think he does a really good job of highlighting not just where players are good at now and where they could improve, but highlighting how those skills could translate to the NBA and where their roles could be filled or what roles they can fill at the NBA level, which is we're trying to make that translation. I think Hoops Intellect does a great job at that.
I love Hoops Intellect. I think he has a really good success rate with the second round too. He's one of my favorite resources for deep dynasty rookie drafts where we have a second round of 30 players drafted. He's one of my more favorite ones to key you in on some of those later talents there. And of course, he's got good takes on the early lottery portion too. So before we close this out, Mitchell, do you have any specific tips or advice for somebody who is thinking about entering into a startup Devy draft?
Number one tip is really go into that extra mile. Keep up with high school recruiting because you are, you know, initially drafting a year ahead. So really keeping up to date with, the ESPN Top 100, where players are going to their school. And, some schools in particular develop talent better than others. Kentucky, for instance, with Calipari, which is a big reason why I chose Boogie Flan because Arkansas is now the new Kentucky, and Boogie Flan is an Arkansas guard playing under Calipari. So placement is very important in terms of player development. Andrew, we talked about this. We love players that come from schools from the Big East. Villanova players are awesome. UConn players are awesome. They tend to translate pretty well. So just kind of knowing team placement is a great indicator of how they develop talent. And another big one recently, I know Yegor is struggling, but BYU has a new system in play that is tied to the Utah Jazz and recently recruited AJ Devansa, where they do have NBA level talent and training at their disposal. So another big indicator is just really identifying team placement.
Great point. Great point. Like you mentioned, the Big East usually is pretty reliable. The SEC, of course, and then formerly the Pac-12, especially like Oregon and Arizona, produced some good prospects. But now that they've disbanded, it kind of dispersed among multiple conferences. But yeah, Big East and SEC are always old reliable for producing some pretty good NBA prospects. Mark, any advice for somebody entering a Devy league?
I think my piece of advice would just be aware of, or at least if you're in a Devy league, you probably have a lot of spots on your bench that you're not going to need to access. For instance, for our league, we start 10, and then you have an additional 10 bench spots, and then you have your 5 minor league spots. So with the fact that you have kind of a good amount of spots for your starters and your bench, be okay rostering those really high upside guys. You're not going to need to probably go more than 15 deep in a season, and that's probably if your season's going disastrously with injuries. It's where those 5 back end bench spots reserved for those high upside guys and stashes, and then same with your minor leagues. I mean, with the obviously maybe the first and second round Devy draft picks, I don't want to say play it safe, but maybe play it a little bit more cautiously. But then once you get to that third, fourth, fifth round, just go for those high upside tickets. Maybe they don't get drafted, maybe they don't declare, but hey, you're looking for high upside because you want to at least you want them to at least have a chance to be rostered or do something for you. If they're just going to be these depth guys who maybe they shoot some threes or defensive specialists or oh, maybe they're a 10-minute per game big. That's what they project as. That's not going to mean that much for your fantasy league at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Great advice from the both of you. So, we encourage you to try out this new format known as the Devy Dynasty League, whether if it's taking over an open spot in a startup, or if you and some friends want to put one together. Like Mark and Mitchell mentioned, this league is only 14 spots big. You could easily put together a 10-team league, have deep benches and 5 minor spots, 10 close friends who closely study basketball and put together elite dynasty rosters. You guys can easily formulate a well-functioning Devy Dynasty League. So we wanted to go into details of how that type of league works today, because it is becoming more and more popular, and I think it's something that's going to really start taking over in the future. So, thank you for tuning in with us today. Mark, first off, thank you for joining us, and also, did you let the people know where they can find you and your work?
Thanks for having me on. This is a really great discussion. I think it's been interesting to see this league play out. You can find me on Twitter what's my Twitter handle? MacAttack. Yes, thank you, Mitchell. Twitter handle is MacAttack145. Bluesky at Mark C Sports Ethos. You'll probably find me a little bit more at Bluesky these days. And then I have my writings and dynasty rankings over at sportsethos.com. And then I have the Pun Intended podcast focusing on dynasty, where I'll review individual teams and then players on the upswings or downswing and kind of a topic of the day that comes out every week. So that's where you can find my stuff at.
Yeah, give Mark a follow. Go check out all of his content that he has. And, you can ask any one of us too, if you guys need advice on, trades in a Devy Dynasty League, or maybe just some questions on how to put one together. Reach out to us or reach out to any of the other guys who are in this league. Like, for example, the members of Point Made, DVC Jason, the formulators of this league. That is going to be very helpful for you if you want to start your own Devy Dynasty League, or if you want to join one. Subscribe if you are new. Leave us a like. Make sure to check out our website where all of our content is located, anglefantasybasketball.wordpress.com. Follow us on X and Bluesky at anglefantasybb, and we will see you guys next time.